Hey guys, it's Abel here with the Sustainable Self-Development Podcast, and this week I'm bringing you a very cool interview with a very cool guest, and that very cool guest is none other than Lyle McDonald. Lyle has been on my channel before, and at that time we talked about all kinds of cool stuff, and this time we delve into everything related to dieting psychology, dietary adherence, and basically how to not kick yourself in the ass when you're dieting. And I just want to say that this will be the primary focus of my content for the upcoming weeks and potentially upcoming months. Basically, how can you master your own psychology, your own mindset, so that you can actually succeed with your fitness goals? As they say, success is 20% mechanics and 80% mindset. And I think it's very, very true when it comes to things like fat loss and getting lean. Because frankly, odds are that if you're listening to this episode, you know what to do to lose fat. You know how much protein you should be eating, you know how much fiber you should be getting, and you know that you should be progressively overloading your workouts in the gym. But probably many of you, just like me, have been spinning your wheels a lot in the past, despite knowing what to do and having the right information. So my goal for the upcoming weeks or months will be to bring on guests who can help you to not make this mistake and help you to actually achieve your fitness goals and bulletproof your mindset so you can really walk the walk and unlock your true potential. And yes, for the nerds amongst you, I totally stole that phrase from Martin Burkhan. I'll link to his article in the show notes that I'm referencing here. But anyway, so I have the legend himself, Lyle McDonald, on here, with whom we had a crazy almost 2 hour long interview, which I will be bringing to you in 2 parts. And we talked about all kinds of cool topics, such as issues around flexible dieting and IIFYM, and how this dietary cult, which started off as a means to liberate and educate people about nutrition and the things that really matter in fitness, now kind of bred almost as much zealots as the clean eating cult did back in the day. We also talked about binge eating and why so many people develop disordered behaviors like binge eating disorders when they get into fitness. Also, we talked about how your personality type might affect what kind of dietary strategy might work best for you. And we also talked about fast versus slow weight loss and which might be more appropriate in different situations. So tons and tons of cool topics here. And now you will hear part 1 of this interview, and part 2 will probably come out in a week or so. So I hope you'll enjoy this discussion. Be sure to subscribe so that you won't miss part 2 when that comes out. And without wasting too much more time, let's get into the interview with Lyle McDonald. All right, so hey Lyle, thanks for coming on. I'm honored to have you here. And how is it going?
Well, as I was telling you before the interview, I've actually been dealing with my first major injury. I managed to completely fracture a bone in my leg and tear 2 ligaments. Roller skating, I got bumped and injured. So I had major surgery, and I'm about 4.5 weeks into my recovery, and it's just a pain in the butt, having to be on crutches and deal with the world. But I've gotten some good writing done because I can't do anything else. Other than that, everything is fine. I think my recovery is proceeding, and I may even end up writing a little ebook or something about just nutritional support for injury recovery, because certainly there are things that can facilitate that. And let's face it, in an active community, people get hurt, ranging from minor stuff, tendonitis, to major stuff. And getting back to function is certainly a key thing, and there's ways to facilitate that. So that's pretty much it. Some good and some bad.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said before the interview, I'm sorry to hear, and I hope that you will be able to channel some of that some of that frustration into writing and some intellectual outlets.
Yeah. Well, I wish I'd done more writing when I first got done with surgery, because they gave me some really good pain drugs. Like they put me on Vicodin and some of the good stuff, which I really don't care for. I'm too much of a control freak. I don't like being impaired in that fashion. But I bet if I'd done some writing while I was hyped up on pain pills, I bet it would have been fascinating, just because it would have been completely insane. But yeah, like a lot of it, I do work at home. I've always had a lot of free time. Mainly this is just like my dogs are a hassle, just functioning when you're injured. Because I live alone, just makes everything harder. So crutches are actually physically very exhausting, although they burn a lot of calories. It is sort of interesting. Getting around on crutches burns about 20% more calories than walking. So I think some new fat loss approaches can come out of this. I think crutching on a treadmill for an hour could possibly be the next approach to low intensity cardio, because it really sucks. Anyway.
Yeah. So just to make a comment which has nothing to do with the theme of today's discussion, when someone gets injured and had surgery and obviously a lot of healing is going on, what would you recommend a person to do, like calorie adjustment wise?
Well, there's kind of two competing things, and a lot of it depends on the nature of the injury. Like on the one hand, if you've been very active, your activity may go down significantly, right? If you're a lower body athlete, like I can't train legs, which is great. No, that's, silver lining, no leg day for a while. So if you're a very active athlete, on the one hand, you're probably going to do less activity unless you find things you can do. Upper body, it can impact weight training, but if you're a cyclist or a runner, not so much. So on the one hand, your activity may go down. On the other, crutches, especially for lower body athletes, do increase if you're getting around on them a lot. So you have to the big issue though, is injury recovery takes a lot of calories. And some of the corrections I found, it can range from 20% over normal for fairly minor injuries up to 50%, right? Like new tissue building is not cheap. And if you think about it, right, think about relative to their body weights, growing children have a tremendous calorie intake. Not big in absolute terms because they're small, but much bigger relative because they are synthesizing bone and tendon and ligament and muscle. In the case of severe burn injury, it can be up to 100%. And I'm not saying, truly a new way of burning in the cuts is just to go get, third-degree burns all over your body. But yeah, so you have to factor that in. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I see people, I get this question all the time, people get hurt. And they're like, I don't want to get fat. And it's like, well, then you're not going to heal. Like you cannot diet when you're injured. When you're injured, your hormones won't be optimal. You will not have the nutrients to support growth. Like, am I happy that I'm having to gain a little body fat now? No, but I'd rather eat too much than too little because I can lose the fat. And if this bone and ligament don't heal properly, I'm going to be impaired for the rest of my life. So, you have to factor in your decrease in activity. So that multiplier may go down, but then you may have to bump it back up 20 to 50%, in a complete bone fracture. It's in that range. So it can be pretty significant. You need plenty of protein. The numbers, they usually throw in like 1.5 grams per kg. So like double the American DRI. I don't know what it is in other parts of the country. And then if you had someone who's weight training, it could even go up beyond that. We may be right back to the old 1 gram a pound. For bone healing, you need plenty of calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K. There's a bunch of little micronutrients. There's been a really interesting paper that collagen synthesis in tendon is increased if you have like a collagen protein about an hour out. A guy named Keith Barr did a really interesting study with a vitamin C collagen supplement, and he took that an hour before doing some jump rope, and collagen synthesis rates were doubled, right? So that's pretty significant. In my own rehab, like I'll eat, and since I've got a bone and a ligament issue, plenty of protein. I'll have my calcium in my bone supplement, and then about an hour later, I'll do stuff to kind of load those tissues, lightly, and based on the it's the same reason we eat protein around workout. You stimulate the growth, but you got to have the nutrients to support it. So there's kind of all these, and you got to control inflammation. For me, I was on anti-inflammatories early. That can actually hurt healing in the long term because they're actually too strong. So, fish oils, curcumin, bromelain, there's a lot of dietary supplements. The key is modulating inflammation, not eliminating it. So it's kind of, there's all these different factors, but yeah, you do need sufficient calories, and it can be a pretty significant increase if the injury is major. Like clearly, if you sprain, if you get a little muscle pull, you don't need to bump your calories by 500. You need 2 days of recovery. If you fracture a bone or tear a ligament and get surgery, it's a pretty significant increase in caloric intake, more than I think people realize.
Cool. That's knowledge bomb for the day, for sure. The thing that I wanna discuss with you today is, I read a really good quote on in one of your articles some time ago, which said that fat loss and dieting success is basically a combination of physiology, environment, and psychology. And in today's discussion, I want to really dive into everything that is related to psychology, because as we just talked about before the interview, physiologically, I mean, the old adage of just eat less and move more is a bit oversimplified, but it's pretty much that simple when it comes to fat loss.
Let me interrupt you just briefly. I read this really funny paper. Funny. I mean, it was and he sort of went through this thing about how the general advice is incorrect. And there's all these overlapping areas, and we can't just give simple advice. And then he got to kind of the conclusion was like, but ultimately what we're looking at is modification. He basically said that eat less and move more is bad advice. And then he concluded that we need to look at ways to modify food intake and activity. And I'm like, what? I'm like, how did you go from here to basically just saying the exact same thing? I mean, he had to write a paper, clearly. And yes, that is oversimplified. We know that there are better and worse ways to diet. There are better and worse ways to do it, introduce activity. One of the things I've written about, people focus on genetics and environment. And make no mistake, these are important. They're also out of your control, right? We cannot change our genetics at this point. Is it interesting? Sure. Do I think we'll reach a point where we can do some genetic testing to determine what diet may be better or worse for somebody? Absolutely. However, they are fundamentally out of our control. So why worry about it, right? Our environment, I've read a big thing in a lot of the obesity prevention things. We know that certain modern environments are relatively more or less conducive to regular activity, right? You go to the American Northeast, those are walking cities. You go to Austin, Texas, this is a driving city. You go to Los Angeles, there's actually a song about it, which is nobody walks in LA. People who walk in LA are poor. Like realistically, it is a car city. So there's this big push, having access to activity parks. That was a thing that got big in the 90s, early 2000s in Nashville, which is my hometown. They built kind of these public activity parks. And what they were is they were walking, running paths that were a half-mile long between activity stations. There'd be chin-up bars and a push-up station, and they had little signs that said, do this. And that's great, because for a lot of people, access, gyms are expensive or can be, time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in some of these textbooks, you've got these theorists going, well, we just need to change the complete structure of modern cities. Okay, that's lovely in theory. What are you going to do? Tear down a major city and rebuild it? Great advice can't be done, right? Pragmatically speaking, cannot be implemented right now, until maybe new cities can be built like that. But we're running out of. But that's just not a realistic thing. So practically, as an individual who wants to lose weight, or as a coach giving someone advice, the main factors we can control are our food intake and our activity. That's just the reality of it. Again, better and worse ways to do it. We know more protein is better than less protein. Some people are better on, yada, yada. That's fine. But at a fundamental level, we're modifying food intake. We're modifying activity. We may be putting in, weight loss drugs if necessary. I saw a recent paper where they were they called it an aggressive approach to weight loss. And it was seriously diet, exercise, 5 different weight loss drugs, weekly meetings with dietitians, regular email chat. They threw everything against the wall to make it stick. Did it work? Sure. Do most people have access to this? No. So yes, but I do think, like you said, we know how to exercise to lose weight or to lose fat or to spare muscle mass. You need resistance training. Cardio can burn calories. Interval training has its whatever. It's all good. We know how to do diet. one thing that I think we have kind of skirted on is the psychology of it. And for years I did the same thing. I think a danger, personal trainers, coaches, our psychology, right? We were the motivated people. We were the ones who got into activity and loved it and wanted to do it. If I wanted to do something in my own training or diet, I just did it, right? Just do it or be quiet about it. Like, that's the attitude, which fine, but it doesn't work that way for a lot of people. It would be fantastic if everyone were intrinsically motivated to do this stuff, right? And extrinsic motivation, we're doing something for external reward. We know that's not optimal. Well, guess what? For the average person, telling them to be intrinsically motivated is like telling a dog to be a cat, right? You cannot do it that way. At best, you start them extrinsically, and hopefully over time it becomes more intrinsic. This gets into something called self-determination theory. But if someone just simply doesn't have that internal motivation, telling them to have that internal is not good advice. You may have to give them okay, do this, and you'll, whatever it is, you'll get money, you'll look better, your significant other will have more sex, like whatever it is. But as they realize the other benefits of being healthy or being active, it may become more intrinsic over time. So you got, and there's a lot of other psychological things. The one I wrote about this years ago is that, like I said, diet's relative. It's easy in premise. It may not be easy in practice. Exercise is easy in premise. Why can't people maintain these habits? That's really the bigger question. We know they can all. Everybody can do it for a little while, right? Everybody, you put them on a diet, they all lose weight. Almost pretty much everybody, if they stick to it. Why do 60 to 70% rebound? That's the big, and this is true in all domains. Why do drug users show no better behavior change? Smoking, alcohol, changing people's general life choices, you see the same failure rate. Now, what I find interesting, getting way off topic, is there's kind of this belief now that, since most people fail at weight loss, we shouldn't even recommend it. Okay, would you say that for a drug user? Would you say that for a smoker? We know that they fail at about the same rate. Why the disconnect? Why in this one domain of weight loss are we saying don't even bother, but in all these others we're saying let's find better ways to do it? I mean, there's still researchers, but there's this weird disconnect to me societally in what we're saying is worth pursuing and is not worth pursuing. But anyway, so yeah, I do think the psychology of it in various aspects, from individual psychology to kind of longer term attitudes about diet and behavior change and things like that are all critically important. So I think that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And just to make a comment on one of the things that you mentioned, weight loss drugs, it brought to mind that I heard some very smart person on a podcast discussing not very long ago that he believes that one solution to basically everybody's weight loss problems will be, in some many years in the future, these drugs that will modify the ghrelin leptin axis. But the thing is that I heard it and my first thought was like, I don't think so. Like, yeah, it will help a lot of people, but I think a lot of people will still manage with their mindsets and psychology to still binge.
And I think this gets into an issue of, like, whenever you look at any behavior change, and this is part of why some of the statistics are wrong, there's a group of people that do it on their own, that succeed, that we never hear about, right? There's this really bad statistic that only 5 to 10% of people maintain weight loss. Well, it's bullshit. It came out of studies in the 50s on people that had been in like a dozen weight loss studies. They are the hardest of the hard cases, right? You go on any internet forum, what do you see? I can't lose weight. Nothing I'm doing is working. This and that and the other. And it makes you think that every single person is having a problem. Well, guess what? The people succeeding don't talk about it, right? The people who are not having problems don't come onto a forum to go, you know what? My diet's working great. I'm out. So we get this really skewed idea that people that are doing it on their own, it's a fairly large proportion, you don't hear about. At the same time, there's a proportion of people that try or may have biological underpinnings, which again, the genetics are there, the biology is there, they're finding all these different factors, which can be modified. But even there's a weird disconnect, right? We have tons of we have not tons. We have drugs to help with smoking cessation, right? Wellbutrin, Chantix is a new one. And what are they doing? They're modifying brain chemistry, right? Wellbutrin raises dopamine in the brain, so you don't need as much reward from smoking. Antidepressant too. I don't know how Chantix works because I don't keep up with this stuff. If you're dealing with hardcore drug addiction, right? Heroin users, they used to get methadone, which is its own hassle. There's another one, a new one, I think it's called Suboxone, that basically makes them not get high from it. No one would question the use of these drugs. We know that they're just necessary. And that's not to say that some people don't quit of their own, right? But when it comes to weight loss, go on any internet forum where there's bodybuilders or fitness people and go, I want to use a weight loss drug. Why don't you just have some damn willpower? Why don't you just suck it up and just stick to your diet? There's this weird weight loss, and I realize it's more complicated than this. People are just like, it's the sloth and gluttony model. Oh, you're just lazy. You just eat too much, without recognizing that there are biological underpinnings to this. Some of the same reward systems that are dysfunctional in drug users are dysfunctional in the obese. They get more reward from tasty foods. We have access, and I'm not saying that changing it is not going to be in a sense, changing your eating habits is harder than stopping drug use, in the sense that you can change your lifestyle to not be exposed to drugs, right? Alcoholics just don't go into bars. They don't go to environments where there's alcohol. You don't have to drink to live. You don't have to do drugs to live. You don't have to gamble to live. You have to eat. You can't get around that. We live in an environment, turn on the TV, turn on the internet, food, commercials. Our entire societal social structure revolves around food. You can't change that, and you have to eat food. So in a weird way, also without getting way off topic, because this will be in one of my books eventually, with drugs, the longer you stay away from them, usually the cravings get a little bit less. So it's hardest in the early stages and easier down the road. Dieting is easiest in the early stages and gets harder down the road because your body's fighting back more. So dieting, kind of like fat loss by definition, again, in some ways is harder. Clearly heroin is more addictive than bagels, but in a behavioral sense, just because you can avoid drugs now and you can't avoid food. So, but yeah, I do think we're gonna, they're looking at drugs that modify the opioid system and the dopamine system, and there's a combo they're using. I forget the name of the drug. Not really my area. And in cases where there is a dysfunctional system, right? If you were type 2 diabetic, no one really, or type 1 diabetic, nobody blinks. You have a biological defect. We need to fix that. Weight loss, there's still a different pervasive attitude. And I do think down the road that will change. We will get better drugs. I do think it will have to be multiple drugs, because we know there's, a dozen, every day they find a new one. We've got ghrelin, leptin, PYY, the opioid system, the dopamine system, the endocannabinoid system, the histamine system. You got all these overlap because food is critical to survival. But I do think we'll get there. I think we'll also get to a point where, just like with antidepressants, just like with so many drugs, we'll be able to identify what a given individual's, what that limiting factor is. Go, okay, you need an endocannabinoid drug, you need a dopamine drug, you need an opioid system drug, and be able to individualize that in the same way we'll be able to individualize diet down the road with nutrigenomics and stuff. So I actually do agree with him in the aggregate that I think they will be used much more commonly, maybe not in everybody, but certainly in the cases of severe obesity and the people who have tried on their own and just can't make it work. So, yeah.
And so for people, like, up until these drugs are developed, let's give people some tangible or actionable things that they can hang on to. So let's start with the huge pink elephant in the room that obviously we have to address first, and that is the whole flexible dieting, clean eating issue, because you were one of the first pioneers who kind of introduced the whole concept that you can have table sugar and whatever, and you can get just as ripped, and that's not really news anymore. So I would be curious, first of all, how do you see the state of flexible dieting and what it's gotten to at this point, and what things are you happy about and what things you're not so happy about
Well,
when it comes to it?
so two things. I actually I'm reasonably sure that I was the first to write really formally about flexible dieting. I mean, make no mistake, these concepts had been used practically. My first book was in 2004. Okay, it is now 2017, and you look around on Facebook and everyone talks about flexible dieting. Some people even pretend that they came up with the idea. Okay, I was there 13 years ago, and I do actually believe I was the first one. And I get it a little, sometimes I get credit for it. And of course, at the time, in a world of extreme bodybuilding and fitness people, to go, you know what, you can actually get ripped having the occasional, bit of junk food. You got to be out of your mind. If you don't eat clean, you can't get it was such a foreign concept. Well, all the top guys eat clean. Well, actually, no, they don't. But that's just all they've ever done. And I'm not saying eating clean doesn't work, which I'm just simply saying that maybe there's a better way. Now, so that's point one. Point two is I need to take responsibility for something, which is the way I represented flexible diet, because I had sort of these very structured approaches. I had the free meal, the refeed, and this is all during the leptin days when I wrote that book. The full diet break was all kind of hormonally based. Those are flexible dieting strategies. Okay, you will not find those, and maybe the full diet break, there's that weird study by Wing that I kind of focused on. Refeeds were a leptin thing. Researchers talk about flexible dieting in a very different way than we talk about flexible dieting practically. And I think to a very great degree, I can be blamed for that because the way I kind of described flexible dieting in that book wasn't really how it's used in the research. So flexible dieting in the research has more to do with attitude, right? You've got rigid attitudes and you've got flexible attitudes. Rigid attitudes are that very black, white, good, bad, diet food, non-diet food idea of food, right? At the extremes, it turns into orthorexia, which is this obsessional nature about the healthiness versus unhealthiness of food. And clean versus unclean is another example of that. Flexible dieting attitudes had more to do with realizing that there are no good and bad in the sense of this is a diet food, because a lot of people think in those terms. They actually are like, when I'm on a diet, I eat these 10 foods. When I'm off a diet, I don't eat any of those foods. Clearly, that's not a good long-term approach. So flexible dieting attitudes has more to do with how people conceptualize things in terms of a food not being good or bad, not this binary black or white thinking. It also has to do with how people deal with violations of their diet, for lack of a better word, basically lapses. The rigid dieter and a researcher, Pahlavi and Herman, were kind of the first two to really talk about this. They talk about restrained and unrestrained eating and disinhibition, which I can get into in a minute, and found that sort of the restrained, this rigid eater, right? If they had a real or perceived lapse in their diet, right? If they had something that was off their diet, they would lose control. And that's a very rigid type of thing, right? It's like, well, I've gone on this specific diet. I had a cookie. I've ruined it. My diet's over. The day is over. You see that being recommended on some of the extremist forums. Somebody goes in and is like, I had some cream in my coffee. Well, cream is unclean. I don't know why, but whatever. Walden's flavorings clean, although they're processed as hell, but dairy cream because dairy is bad. And literally people will go, nope, day's ruined. Go eat blizzards. You've screwed it up. That's a very rigid attitude. You either are perfect or you're zero. There is no middle. Flexible dieting attitudes are somewhere in the middle. So that's again, I take full responsibility for that. I made it sound like flexible dieting was these strategies. So anyway, that got written and everybody ignored it for about 8 or 10 years, and then now it's all anybody can talk about, right? And unfortunately, the flexible dieting community has become almost as extremist and as zealotrous as the clean eating group ever was. It has just become another ideology that if you're not flexible dieting, you're doing it wrong, and that's just as dangerous. Now, again, I was one of the Pioneer, whatever. I just happen to find the right studies. I'm pro flexible dieting. Don't think I've reversed my opinion on this. Anyone listening to this, however, there's more nuance to it for a number of reasons. And there's a bunch of different variables that kind of go into this. I've even seen some of the extreme flexible dieters, right? So we have orthorexia, which is this attitude of it's almost a religious attitude. Foods are clean or unclean. It's this obsessional nature. And if someone says, you know what, peanut butter is a trigger food for me, if I start, I can't stop, and say, so I don't eat any. You will have people going, you're orthorexic. No. That's not what orthorexia means. Orthorexia is when someone says, I can't eat peanut butter because it makes me morally weak as a person. Right? It's the difference between the born-again anti-alcoholic. It's the religious anti-alcoholic. Right? I don't personally drink much. If I have 2 drinks in a year, that's a lot. I know people that drink. I know people that smoke a lot of weed because I'm in Austin, and if you don't deal with weed, you don't have friends. I don't have any moral qualms about it. As long as it's not hurting me, I don't give the first damn. Right? I don't care what you do, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. That's between you and that's your own issue. I choose not to drink because I don't enjoy it. My father I had some when I was younger, I had some problems with my dad when he was drunk for a couple of years. It's a personal choice, but I'm not morally opposed to it. And that's the difference between orthorexics and simply choosing not to eat something that you know through experience has thrown you off your diet. But that's how extreme it's gotten it. It's not that you can allow non-diet foods. It is you must allow non-diet foods. And those are very different things to me. Giving someone the option to do so is very different than saying that they have to or they're dieting wrong. And it's no different than saying if you eat those foods, you're dieting wrong. So that's problem number one in the most general. And I know not everyone is doing this. This is an aggregate type of thing. And unfortunately, the extremists in any field are the loudest. The people that don't have this attitude, they're not the ones online screaming about it. It's true of any ideology. So that's problem number one. The biggest problem I see, and I think this is the biggest attitudinal or conceptual change I have, right? Most people who are really pro-flexible dieting in terms of specific strategies, if it fits your macros, whatever the strategy is, if you look at their history, they've got 5 or 10 years of rigid dieting. I did it. You probably did it. We all started there. I spent years measuring every morsel, being completely psychotic. These people are like, oh, I eat intuitively. That's a whole separate thing. I eat what I want. No, you don't. You look at people that are eating intuitively. Wow, you had half a bowl of cereal and a quarter cup of milk. Whoa. Because subconsciously, even if I go to a buffet and I'm eating all the food, I know how much I'm eating. I don't care, but I know exactly what I'm putting in the system. They've even shown that obese individuals, the part of your brain, the frontal cortex that makes you aware of that type of thing, it turns on in lean people and doesn't turn on in the obese. The lean person knows how much they're eating. And they go, well, I've had enough, consciously, even if they're not full. The obese person, so someone coming from a 10-year background of rigid eating, knows exactly what that, if it fits your macro food is, how much is in that Pop-Tart. They've got the food control because they've developed it over years, and they may have a different biology. That's fantastic. That's all good and well. Here's the thing. If you take the typical overweight individual, they have a decade, 2 decades of really poor eating. They often have a neurobiology that is very different in terms of the reward system, maybe a little bit dysfunctional. Just their taste for these things, their ability to control their food may not be good. And if you tell them, you know what, I want you to go out and deliberately break your diet too early on, it may very well throw them off their diet, because all you're doing is throwing them back into the same food habits that cause them to lose control, which isn't to say that they can't try it. And a book that's kind of currently on hold that Insane Women's book derived from, I talk about that in the women's book too, is like, look, these strategies are great when they work, and they're completely self-destructive when they don't. So try them. Go out, have a free meal, and if you wake up the next day and get right back on your diet, you can use it. And if it throws you off your diet, it's not for you. Or more accurately, it's not for you right now. Maybe 12 weeks from now, when your taste buds have changed, when your food habits, and habits are as important as anything else, when your food habits are better in control, try it again. So that's a practical issue. There's another issue that a lot of people don't consider, which is a lot of the guys really trumpeting it. Oh yeah, I have my 2 Pop-Tarts a day, and they're big males who are burning a lot of calories, who are dieting on 2,000 calories. They can put in a couple hundred calories of junk and be fine. Small females don't have the room in their diet. When you're on, the poverty macros, a woman on 1,300 calories who eats a Pop-Tart is now starving to death in the sense of the volume of, so there's another practical issue. Great when it works, horrible when it doesn't. So that's and this is why I got into what flexible dieting really means. Flexible dieting is an attitude more than a strategy. And one of the questions is, okay, because with a lot of psychological stuff, a lot of it's very inbuilt, right? If you are a perfectionist, there's a biology. Now it can be changed with cognitive behavioral therapy and whatever, but that's kind of part of who you are. So the question for a while was, are these flexible and rigid attitudes? Are they inbuilt? Are they learned? More than that, can they be modified? And several papers, Weston Hofer is the one doing a lot of this work, showed that one of the predictors of 3-year weight loss success was developing a flexible attitude. So it can be changed over time. A lot of this is getting people to understand, okay, fine. And I've put this example in my books, right? You've been dieting for 6 days. You've stuck to your deficit. You've created a 3,000 calorie deficit across the week. Even today, right? You've maintained your deficit. 500 calories. Okay, you had 200 calories of junk. Well, guess what? You still have a 300 calorie deficit. So you're good. You're still on your diet. And you're 200 calories behind. What is 200 over 3,500? What is that, 1/17 of a pound? Whatever it works out to. I can't do the math in my head right now. But it's like that 200 calories doesn't matter. Even if you eat at maintenance, well, you're still 3,000 calorie deficit for the week. Now you're 1/7 of a pound behind your goal. Really? Just really? This is the end of the world for you? Even if you eat 500 calories over your goal, you've still got a 25. Okay, now you've lost 2/7, 3.5 of a pound behind your goal. Now, if you're on a tight schedule, that might matter. The general public, dude, you're looking at a year of dieting. This day doesn't matter. And one aspect of flexible dieting attitudes is that, okay, you just make a little adjustment the next day. Little being the key word. Do not go, well, I ate 300 calories over my goal today. I'm going to do 3 hours of cardio. That's exercise bulimia. That's a whole separate thing, right? Fine, you're a few hundred calories over your goal. Well, adjust a little bit the next day. Adjust a little bit the next 2 or 3 days. You're right back on schedule. Or just move on with your life and don't give a damn, right? And this gets into a thing, and I actually I dug into the drug addiction research, because there's a lot, I think, to me, there's a lot more good stuff coming out of that. Because there, the behavioral issues are easy. Don't do it. Just don't. It's not a matter of modification. It's a matter of don't. But there are still lapses. And they call this the abstinence violation effect, the AVE. And it's like, okay, you've lapsed on your goal. You can see it one of two ways. You can see it as a negative, beat yourself up over it, and guess what? You're probably just going to go right back to using. That's how the rigid dieter approaches dieting. I screwed up. I was weak. No, you're human. I blew it because I sucked, because I had no willpower. I give up. Or you can learn from it. That's the positive. What environment was I in? Did I go to a dinner party and I was hungry? Did I go into an environment that maybe I can't handle? I years ago on some of my forums, some guy read my book, and he was like 3 weeks into dieting. He's like, I'm gonna go to the buffet. Dude, please don't. You are self-sabotaging yourself, because there is no way in hell you are gonna go to the buffet and not go nuts. You're not there yet. You may never be there. Right? There are alcoholics that can eventually probably not ever have a drink, but they can go to the bar with their friends and they'll drink their soda water and they can be around it. That may be years. It may not be, like I said, I'm not a drug addiction specialist. If I'm getting the numbers wrong, don't crucify me for it. And some may never get there. Some simply can't be around it. So guess what? You have to cut yourself off from your friends that drink. You never go to those environments. Food, you don't, but again, so my point being that getting people to adopt a flexible dieting mentality, especially in beginners who don't have that food control, that's the bigger issue. The specific strategies can come later or not. Those are great free meals, like if it fits your macros, when it works. But it's more of getting them to change their overall attitude. And I find that I keep saying intermittent fasting. That's a whole separate kettle of fish. They've become just as bad too. I can predict 99% certainty that if the word breakfast shows up on my Facebook group, there will be at least one person who goes, well, I haven't ate breakfast for months. I don't care. Seriously, you're a religious zealot. Be gone. Same thing here. The flexible dieting zealots, if anyone even suggests clean eating, they will have to go if you're not flexible dieting. So it's really a matter of the strategies are great when they work, but it's more of an attitudinal thing. And with beginners, with the overweight beginner, with someone without a decade of food control, you need to work on the attitudes first. And a lot of that comes with time. So great, they had a bad day. You go, it's all good. Everybody's done it. What can we learn from this? What positive can we take from this? And now we got to learn. Now we got to make another mistake, right? Dieting, as I'm starting to put it now. Dieting is a learning process. You can give somebody the best diet, and if it doesn't, bad advice not taken or good advice not taken is bad advice, as Dan Duchesne once said. What can we learn from this experience? All right, well, I had a spoonful of peanut butter and I ate the jar. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Yeah. Or maybe I should go get a single packet of peanut butter, which I think they make now. For me, I know that if I get a bag of cookies, well, I will eat the bag of cookies, right? I can't have them in the house. If I'm dieting and want a treat, I have to get dressed, go to the grocery store, the mini mart. I buy exactly how much I want to eat. I get a single serving packet or whatever it is. That's it. Because that, for me, is a practical, because I learned the hard way what doesn't work. But that's where you have to change that mindset from, I messed up my diet because I'm weak and I suck and I can't stick to anything. And well, yeah, you did. You succeeded for 6 days. And you had one bad day, but people focus on the one bad meal or you ate a snack because God forbid you be human. So a lot of it and that's where I really see that community going wrong. If you're not doing, if it fits your macros, you are not dieting properly. Maybe they can't because it kicks them off their diet or doesn't fit in their diet. One way for the smaller female, they'll be raising calories to maintenance on a diet. Well, that's when you fit in the snack, when your calories are up by 750 a day. Now you have room for it. It's great to tell people. So anyway, so that's kind of where I think, unfortunately, the flexible dieting community has gotten itself. And again, and this is a different issue. Again, what I've long seen, the typical trainer, fitness type, at 15, man, I got in the weight room and it was what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be sore and train. And look at how the typical overweight individual, man, they're scared going into the gym because they're surrounded by a bunch of perfect bodied, self-righteous, judgmental pains in the ass. I don't know if you saw recently, some fitness chick basically took a picture of an overweight woman who was at the gym working on it and was like, can't unsee this. It's like, you want to know why people don't want to go to the gym? Because of you. Yeah. Because they walk in and you judge them for trying to better themselves. Like, I know people hate Planet Fitness and shit on Planet Fitness. Well, guess what? They've got more people in the gym than any Gold ever has. You know why? Because it's not filled with a bunch of judgmental a-hole, let's be honest, bodybuilders. Powerlifters aren't like this. Olympic lifters aren't like this. It's the fitness freaks. Anyway, that's where the trainers and the coaches come from. And I think they frequently don't understand the psychology of someone who doesn't want to be doing this, who doesn't have the drive. A lot of times, frequently the best trainers are people that were overweight and figured it out because they understand. If you've never been 300 pounds, you don't know what that's like. You have no conception I see go to the gym and you see this little 130-pound, 150-pound trainer taking a 300-pound woman through walking lunges. Are you out of your damn mind? Are you out, some of the early ebooks that are like, oh, beginner trainees, T push-ups with a 150-pound male. Really? Really? You think a 350-pound guy is going to be able to do one of these? What a great way to make them hate what they're doing. And diet is the same. Frequently, you need to introduce them gradually, change their attitude before you get into the specifics. But that's been lost. So there's my 40-minute rant about that. And like I said, you can blame me for a lot of this, but I have seen it really go a direction that I think has done more harm. And that's not even getting into the all Pop-Tart guys or these 10,000 calorie food challenges or all this crap that make people think that people are crazy because they want to get YouTube views. But anyway.
Yeah. Oh man, you're the perfect podcast guest because you just have to switch a button and the podcast gets created.
So. It does itself. Yeah, right. Because I won't shut up.
But so that's the first comment. But the second comment is I love how you made some definitions behind the term, because that flexible dieting is more of an attitude and not necessarily the nutritional strategy and tracking macros itself. And I think that where clean eaters went wrong in the past and why it's gotten so much flack is a combination of a couple of things. One, a lack of knowledge and understanding thermodynamics and simple concepts like that. And B, and probably more importantly, the ability to stay mindful and to learn or to be able to practice the skill of moderation, which is much harder in my experience, especially for a lot of people with certain psychological makeup than extremist approaches. And so the only thing I would be wondering about is, in the grand scheme of things, all things being equal, let's say we had two study groups and both of them had the same nutritional knowledge and kind of the proper mindset. Which one would be able to control their food better? Those who kind of view foods as good or bad, or those who just have this, all foods are completely equal as long as macros are the same? Because I know for myself that I've always had a much easier time controlling my food intake with those foods that I kind of qualified as bad, because I never had the urge to eat tons of French fries, for example, even though I love them. But because I view them kind of as this processed crap, I just excluded. But things with like peanut butter or oatmeal, which are kind of nutritious, healthy, whatever, I have a much more difficult time controlling myself with those foods, or had in the past before I banned them for good.
So on the one hand, there are studies that show that people do better with simple rules diets, right? Now we tend to think, people that are very into this, I'm measuring macros and I'm measuring numbers, I'm considering nutrient density. And that's great when you need to be that kind of detailed and stuff. But again, I think there's the issue. It's different if you're trying to diet from 12% to 8% for a male. You've got a lot less flexibility. Someone just starting out, whatever. They just need to change it. They need to be eating less, whatever works. But simple rules diets give them less to think about, right? If you say don't eat carbs, well, that's easy. I know what a carb is. Well, sometimes people know what a carb is. I can't eat it. I can't eat it, right? Even getting back to that drug addiction literature, they talk about bright line boundaries, right? If you tell someone, you can maybe go into a bar and be okay, well, they will. They may fall off the wagon. If you say you can't go into a bar, or so let me actually, it's even the language is even better. I don't go to bars. So clearly to diet, you have to be restrained, right? It's wonderful to go, there's that percentage of people that just stay lean naturally and we hate them. But for most people, to lose weight, you have to be concerned and restrain your eating. This is just the reality of the world. However, there is that rigid versus flexible restraint, with flexible restraint generally being superior overall. But yeah, certainly I do think there's just all these overlapping factors, and we're not quite there. Usually they give these really these various questionnaires to determine if you're rigid restraint and disinhibited, and that's another issue. I believe rigid restraint per se is not the problem. It's rigid restraint for people that have high disinhibition. So if you've got that particular combination, that's when breaking your diet causes you to lose control. So there are people with rigid restraint who don't become disinhibited if they break their diet a little bit. There are questionnaires out there that allow you to determine this, but that could be another way of determining ahead of time who might be better or worse for a given diet. And again, I think a lot of what we see, we don't hear, well, it's funny, now we hear about the people succeeding, right? You look at the clean eating community and everyone's like, oh, yep, all the winners used clean eating. Well, not true anymore, but even if that were true, sport selects for success, right? What we don't hear about in the clean eating thing, we don't hear about the whatever percentage, let's call it 80, who don't get there. We don't hear about the 80% who crack, who break, who go off their diet and never get back on for months and months and months. We see the people that it works for. And I think you see the same thing. And it's funny because usually you see the other way around. Like I said, the dieting failures, you typically, in general dieting, you hear about the people who aren't succeeding. But for clean eating, we focus on the winners. Well, that's like focusing on the Bulgarian Olympic lifters. 1 out of 66 guys actually didn't get wrecked by that program. Well, that's the guy that won. Yeah. But the 65 who got destroyed is what matters. If a given dietary approach is working for 10% and failing for 90%, that's not a good dietary approach. Yeah. If a given dietary approach is getting 75% of people closer to their goals, maybe not to the upper limit, and failing for 25%, that is statistically a better approach for the majority. I think we've also got this issue, right? We've got the general dieting public who are whatever. For a male, let's say it's 25% body fat to 40. For a woman, 30. I mean, there are cases of people with 60% body fat. We have the general population who have issues with food control, bad overall lifestyle generally. Then we have the obsessives, right? Then we have the males going from 15 to 8 or 12 to contest level, the women going from 22 to 10 to 12% for contest. These are really distinct populations in my mind. Here, the issue is usually physiological, right? That's my ultimate diet, stubborn fat. You're dealing with the body fighting back. They've got good food control. By and large, they have got their training. They don't miss workouts. There you're dealing with physiological aspects. Here, you're generally dealing with psychological aspects, or behavioral, I think is a better word. For this group, for the general population, you're looking at a very different set. And of course, research focuses here. By and large, research doesn't give a damn about lean athletes and fat loss. Why would they? Right now, it's funny, there's more work coming out on, they're looking at, physique competitors, and they've always been interested in bodybuilders. But why would you do a weight loss study in a lean athlete? They don't need it, right? So most of the research is on the general population. The athletes, lean athletes, is a much more interesting group. To me, the physiological problems have fascinated me for 2 decades. But it's 10%, 5% of the weight loss population. This is the group that's having problems, is losing even 10% of their starting weight and keeping it off. And that gets into behavioral stuff. So I think you are looking at different things for lean athlete. You don't have the flexibility. If you're on 1,800 calories, there's not a lot of room there. And if conceptualizing a food as bad so that you won't eat it, won't eat it, that's a very different thing than this person. If you tell them you can't ever have something, they're just going to crave it, and finding a way to allow it within limits. So I do, like I said, I think you've got a whole set of interacting variables that's population specific, individual specific, goal specific. And to get a guy to 15% body fat, they can do that without counting calories. They really can. To get him to 10 to 12, it's going to take a lot more work. And to get him to sub 10, he's going to have to be meticulous. right? And again, Eric Helms has, his 3-tier system, which I think is excellent. And, at this level, just change something, man. If you're got someone who's 50 pounds overweight, look at their diet, find the one big red flag, regular soda, whatever it is. Small changes make huge differences. I had a client years ago. He was drinking like 4 regular sodas a day. I said, switch to diet or water. That was it. He's losing 2 pounds a week.
Yeah.
I made the tiniest, most non-intrusive change I could make with him. And if I'm dealing with a guy at 10%, I need to know your activity, your calories, your protein. I got to know all the details because you've got that tiny little range to work within to get you to your goal, not lose muscle mass, maintain your performance if you're an athlete. So you're dealing with a lot of different issues on top of the individual stuff. So I don't know if that question so much as
definitely, and I think to conclude this segment of this discussion, which is on flexible dieting, I think the conclusion is that it's more an attitude, and if you have an unflexible attitude, then you're not gonna do well regardless of if you do clean eating or macro tracking, because if you have an unflexible attitude and you follow quote unquote flexible dieting and you go over by 200 calories or 50 carbs or whatever, you're going to lose your shit.
No, absolutely. No, I think that's a really good point. And actually, and just kind of before we move on, one thing I've always found interesting, like the clean eaters, and you are dealing with, if not overt, then some clinical eating disorders. Like the reality, this is a really sick thing to say, but there's truth to it. Having a subclinical eating disorder is great for dieting for physique competitors, and most of them do. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize eating disorders. I know that they're tragic, they're fatal, it's a horrible, horrible thing to deal with. But in a very real sense, from a dieting standpoint, and I do think, obviously the eating and training habits of the athlete are very different than the anorexic who's eating an apple a day. We're dealing with, it is a relatively healthier outlet for what may be a subclinical eating disorder. In the aggregate, it is, because they've got the food control. Like, again, I know it's really kind of sick to put it in those terms, but it is actually absolutely the case. But what you see in that clean eating community, as they say that flexible dieting is terrible and this food will kill your health, this and that and the other, what do? They plan a cheat day where they factually eat more bad foods, unclean foods, junk foods, whatever the hell you want to call it. They eat more on that single day than 90% of flexible dieters eat in a week or 2 weeks. And yet, because of the way they conceptualize diet, it's either perfect or a binge. That is a bulimic type of attitude, rather than moderation. It's on or off for them, and that can and that weekly pattern become a monthly pattern, become an annual pattern. These folks will literally diet for 6 straight months, clean eating all the way through, and then they won't go to the gym for 3 months. They're so burnt out. They're so psychologically destroyed. They're off there, and they just eat, and they gain 40 pounds, and then they can't ever get it off. Like, it happens. And so there's like a good example. Like, it's this extremist, that's rigid dieting in a nutshell. It's extremist. If they break their diet a little bit, it's blizzard day. The flexible dieter, assuming that the flexible dieting isn't its own trigger, is just like, well, and I think what's funny, even the flexible dieters, even the most adamant if it fits your macros, they're not even doing it every day. In my experience, I know we've got the all Pop-Tart idiots. I know we've got the guys, the ice cream diet guy. I know we've got these guys trying to make a point. The average, if it fits your macros guy or flexible dieter, it's not a matter of I must have this every day. I will have this every day. It's I can have this if I want it. And again, these are very different ways of conceptualizing what's going on. Even knowing that you can is very different than having to do it. It takes a psychological stress. If it's like you said, fries to you, if I said, you will never have a French fry again in your life, you want them now.
That would suck.
Because you know you can't have them. Knowing that at some point, if you're just in the mood, once a month, I just want to have a greasy plate of salty French fries or whatever you put on them. Knowing that you can takes the psychological stress away from telling someone you can never eat this again is a very different psychological construct. Then again, you could also argue, well, how satisfying is it to know that you can eat a little bit? If I told you, well, within your calorie limit, you can have 6 French fries, that might even be worse. And I think that's the point you're making. That's the other problem with if it fits your macros or flexible dieting to a degree, is if you're trying to keep it within a certain macro content, for some people, a little may actually be worse than none because it's less satisfying. Like, it's great to eat a box of Pop-Tarts. I've done it. It's great to eat a bag of cookies or whatever. Only having a couple can often be less satisfying. Which is also maybe a reason to save that for, I don't like the term cheat meal. Like, when you're doing kind of a refeed and raising calories to maintenance, that's really when you have the calories to play with. When you're going from 1,800 to 3,000, you can actually fit in, and this is something else I suggested in the women's book, and I'll talk about this when I finish this other book, is for a lot of people, free meals, the idea of you having a non-diet meal is really, it's kind of pointless. And I've had people say that, and the more I've thought about it, I don't think they're wrong. It's like, it makes it a non-diet day, but it's like, well, I don't really feel like I'm making progress, but it's not really satisfying me. And do I have to do them? And I'm like, no. If you want it, know that you can, if you've got a social event or whatever, and you can go do it and not stress about it. For a lot of people, that free meal concept is in this really nebulous, it kind of helps psychologically, but not really physiologically. Refeeds are better because it's like, well, now you've got a lot more calories to play with, and you can actually have a satisfying amount of that off-diet food. Diet breaks, same thing. You're at maintenance for 7 to 14 days. You've got a lot of more room to fit stuff in within your calorie budget because your calorie budget's much higher. So I think for a lot of people, those might be better practical strategies to apply these to than free meals, especially, or even if it fits your macros. Because let's face it, one Pop-Tart is not interesting.
Yeah.
600 calories of Pop-Tarts is interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's something Eric talks about as well, because his approach to dieting is actually, as you get deeper in the diet, you refeed more often, you move to maintenance more often. And I've been saying that for years, which also falls on deaf ears. What do you mean I should diet less strictly as I get leaner? Because you should. Just trust me on this. What that means is you actually have more, the diet days get harder, but the non-diet days, you've even got a little bit more flexibility because calories are significantly higher. Combining those two and putting those flexible, because again, flexible dieting doesn't mean you have to eat flexibly every day or you have to apply if it fits your macros. It means that you can if you want to. And I think that's another point that's really been missed. It's great. These guys are like, yep, I eat a Pop-Tart every day. Well, goody. I don't care. That may work for you, but for other people, just knowing they can once or twice a week rather, may be enough. So.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this part 1 of this amazing interview with Lyle. And as I said, next week we will be back with part 2, where we basically further investigate the topics of overeating, how your personality affects of what kind of dietary strategies you should be choosing for yourself. And we will also be discussing fast versus slow weight loss. So an amazing part 2 is coming up very soon. I hope you enjoyed this, and subscribe to me on YouTube if you watched it there, or leave a rating on iTunes if you listen to it in podcast format. And yeah, see you very soon. That was it. Bye.